I'm Bruce Alberts, the President of the National Academy of Sciences for the last 10 years. It's a pleasure for me to be here to welcome you to our home. Unfortunately, I came back from Cleveland last night, got on an airplane, and I got a very bad cold. Traveling was not much fun, so I may not be too coherent this morning, but fortunately I'll be brief. Let me just say a word about the Academy, because I know not all of you are familiar. We got a charter as a private, independent organization existing in Washington, D.C. from Abraham Lincoln's Congress in 1863, which said we could exist as an honorary association of the nation's best scientists. At least that was the way it was supposed to be. But to do that, we had an obligation, and that is the Academy shall, whenever called upon by any department of the government, investigate, examine, and report upon any subject of science or art. Art actually meant technology in those days. But here's the catch. The Academy shall receive no compensation whatsoever for any services to the government of the United States. We had a rocky first 10 years. But it worked out very well because it turned us into a massive volunteer organization. We do a lot of work, as I'll tell you in a second. We now call ourselves the National Academies. This name is about 2 years old because under the same charter, two other honorary organizations were subsequently incorporated, the National Academy of Engineering and the Institute of Medicine. Together, these three organizations have more than 5,000 members. And in World War I, an operating arm of these organizations, which was named the National Research Council, was set up because it was realized that scientists, engineers don't have all the answers, and we needed lawyers, teachers, others to put on these advisory panels that we established. And of course, World War I made that very obvious. Today, we're a very active organization, more than one report every working day. 85% of these are requested by the U.S. government. The critical issue for everyone who uses our advice is that they know they're getting independent advice. The government, what that no compensation whatsoever clause turns out to mean is that the government will pay for the cost of a study, that is, will pay for the airfare for the volunteers who serve on the panels and their hotel and their food while they're here, as well as for the staff to support them. And despite the fact that the government pays for it, they understand that they have no control over the result. So after the first meeting or so, where they put their input into the panel's deliberations in open session, the committee writes their own report, and the full text is released to the press and to the public. As soon as the report is delivered to the government, we don't negotiate the answer, and that's what makes us valuable. There are two kinds of reports, science for policy, which is most of what we do. I'll give you one example of that, and policy for science, which is a very important function, and what this meeting is about, at least to some extent, is policy for science. Science for policy, there was a dispute right after President Bush came into office about the level of arsenic in drinking water that should be set by the Environmental Protection Agency. Governor Whitman asked us to look at the science, and we did that and discovered that arsenic was actually more dangerous than we had thought earlier, and therefore she accepted the 10 part per billion standard that Clinton had recommended just before he left office. Policy for science, this is our huge report done as a contribution by the academies after the September 11th event, and this report called Making the Nation Safer, the Role of Science and Technology in Countering Terrorism, basically lays out a roadmap for what's now the Department of Homeland Security. This is very unusual because we had more than 160 people involved in this one. Well, this symposium involves policy for science and some important aspects of this concerning scientific publication, as far as I'm concerned, are the validation aspect, the dissemination aspect, and the fact that specific obligations are created when a scientist publishes, and I just want to go very quickly over those. The validation function of publication, of course, is accomplished by peer review and editing. We assure that the science is valid, and we ensure that the data and the methods are complete and clearly presented. This is what distinguishes scientific journals from the massive stuff that's on the internet. I really very much appreciate the editing and the refereeing function, because I get all kinds of scientific ideas mailed to me personally as president of the Academy, which I have no time or ability to evaluate. There's a lot of things claimed to be science out there, and we need to discriminate between what isn't good science. Otherwise, we can't move forward. Publication, of course, also has a dissemination function, and that's what this meeting, is really, that's what's really novel about this meeting, because we have a new way of disseminating. Electronic publishing on the internet greatly enhances the potential reach of the dissemination part of science, allows us to reach nations and peoples who would otherwise not be reached, and by allowing powerful search engines to rapidly find desired specific information, we can, in principle, make much better use of the data and the information and the knowledge that's out there. This latter function, I assume, will be talked about here. We could do a lot better. There's a great opportunity for what's called data mining, so we can really find what we really want. There's a lot of journals that are not yet up in available form. I get letters from our friends in India, for example, pointing out that their journals are not really abstracted by our services, and science is an international activity, and we need to do better about making it, the knowledge that's developed everywhere, available. Well, we all know about this. I'm a biological scientist, by the way. This, I think, is a wonderful effort by our government to take what was formerly the Medline services that, when I was in my laboratory at University of California, San Francisco, I used to ration my students' use of Medline searches, because it cost me $100 every time they were, they were too careful about how they used it, and it generally cost me $100 for every session that they were involved in. One of them was involved in. So I, along with everybody else in the world, was overjoyed when this came to be a free service, basically a contribution to the U.S. government, using taxpayer monies to make the biomedical literature really accessible. This, of course, is run by the National Library of Medicine. Our own journal is the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. I see Nick Cosarelli, our editor-in-chief, is here. We've tried to set an example by making it as available as we can without going broke. And we make it immediately free to 130 developing nations on the internet now, and we make it free to everyone after a 6-month delay. Here's some of the countries. I couldn't get them all on the slide, but you get the idea. As these countries become more effectively connected to the internet, this is going to be enormously valuable for them, and it will change their opportunity of their universities, their scientists, to participate in this great international scientific effort. We also publish, of course, our reports, and we want to do the same with them. This is a different kind of scientific literature. This is consensus studies of what the science that other people have done means in terms of, arsenic in drinking water, climate change, thousands of other issues. This is about 10 years worth of our reports. All 2,800 books are up online, and we've now made the PDFs that we have for these immediately free to 130 developing nations as well. What about the obligation? So I've talked about validation. I've talked a little bit about obligation. A little bit about dissemination. I want to talk about the obligation part. We had a workshop here about a year ago or so. It was sponsored by the Board of Life Sciences, and the title was Sharing Publication-Related Data and Materials, Responsibilities of Authorship in the Life Sciences. Tom Check, the head of the Howard Hughes Foundation, was the chair of this group. Tom, of course, is a Nobel Prize-winning scientist and a very outstanding biomedical scientist. And basically, they made these points. The publication of scientific information is intended to move science forward. More specifically, the act of publishing is a quid pro quo in which authors receive credit and acknowledgement in exchange for disclosure of their scientific findings, providing these findings in a form on which other scientists can build with further research. That's how science works. An author, therefore, has the obligation to release both data and materials, as life sciences, remember, to enable others to verify and extend published findings. Therefore, publication creates obligations in science that need to be enforced. These need to be enforced through grant agencies that fund the work and through the journals that publish the work. And without this kind of sharing, the progress of science will be greatly slowed. So these are all issues that come to my mind. I should point out, although I've been a bureaucrat for 10 years, full-time job here in this building, before that I was a scientist for 30 years, so I'm telling you things that I understand from my own life as a biological scientist. So in ending, I just want to invite you to do two things if you have not been here before. There's a wonderful statue of Einstein right on Constitution Avenue. It's the last place where the school trips end, where they take the pictures of the kids sitting on his lap. And so sometime during your stay here, please see that. We also have a wonderful new building downtown. It just opened, we actually inaugurated about a week ago. It's the new Keck Center of the National Academies at 505th Street, near the National Gallery of Art, and I urge you to come visit us there as well. Thank you.